friends are like obedient dogs. They come when they're called.
I had something appear to me 6 years ago. It was invisible at first and would do things like cause a wind to blow through the room. It would appear in the darkness of the bedroom as a humanoid figure, as blacker than the darkness. It became the sensation of something crawling under the bed covers and over my crutch. It would pleasure me at times. I remember focusing on a succubus, but I thought they were supposed to look like something. What I have is completely invisible, except when I look at it out of the corner of my eye in a very low light. I can see a thin, transparent tendril, almost like smoke. It constantly attacks me at night, and has, over the last few years, began attacking during the day. I feel like muscle spasms crossed with a worm crawling up my leg. It can cause pain in the tips of my toes, almost like it is biting. I can grab hold of it temporarily, and literally feel it pulling as I wrap it around my fingers. If I hold it above a flame, it spasms like mad. When I wake in the morning, it has usually wrapped itself all across my back. When I didn't burn it regularly, it got stronger and stronger. I have heard it chink against things audibly when sometimes I throw it against something. I've never spoken to it, but I know that when it is active, I experience more paranormal activity. I've tried invoking the name of Jesus to get rid of it, but it will not go. I've also been able to put it on other people. I've freaked friends out by having it climb on them. It will usually affix around the crutch or, more commonly, the lower back. What the heck am I experiencing? It became very active when I tried astral projection whilst under the influence of alcohol. That was a mistake.
About 10 or so years ago, I had the house to myself as I was still living with my parents at the time, and I had a friend over. The night was going smoothly and normal. We're just playing co-op video games as teenage boys do, but eventually we both end up on our phones scrolling through Tumblr. My friend stumbles upon a 40 to 50 minute audio tape file of a private investigator talking to a high school campus about his experience during a murder investigation he's conducted. I believe it took place in Texas, but long story short, towards the end of this audio file, it leads up to the PI believing that the victim was exposed to a demon or evil entity that was the reason for the death of this person. He stated at the very end of the testimony of the case that the demon feeds off your fear, and the more you think about it, the stronger its energy and presence gets. As far as we could both tell, it was a real testimony, and not a parody or creepypasta. So me and my friends hear the whole 40 or so minutes of testimony. We're just enthralled, almost hypnotized by it, and afterward try to go back to playing our game. Not 5 minutes later, the power in my room goes out. My room only. No big deal. I just go flip the breaker and turn it back on. 3 minutes later, boom, again. Flip the breaker again. A minute later, the same, and this continues with shorter time frames until the power in my room simply won't come back on. The first time it happens, we think it's a mere coincidence, but by this point, fear is really happening, and the thought of the entity is in our heads. At this point, it's around midnight to 1 a.m. My friend decides this isn't worth it for him, and he heads back to his place. Lol, thanks, leaving me by myself. The night goes on a little bit, and after my friend left, I spent the rest of the night in my living room with the lights on and crashed on the couch. I wake up with the TV still on between 3 to 4 a.m. I don't know what possessed me to return to my room for sleep, but for some reason I convinced myself it was all in my head. I fall asleep incredibly fast, and my dream begins with me in my bed and room just as I was laid out in real life in the pitch darkness. This was extremely vivid, and an exact replica of my room. It was as lucid as could be, almost like being awake, but at one of the top corners of my room, where the wall meets the ceiling, I saw a pair of angry, dirty yellow eyes that were on a body blacker than black, hanging on my ceiling, just staring into my soul. I was fixated on the eyes, and they were fixated on me. I was just in shock and couldn't move, but the second I tried to move at all, the shadow figure zoomed to another corner of my ceiling and then launched at me. I woke up in a sweat just before I get contacted. The dream felt so real and vivid, I woke up literally screaming, and there was a real sense of dread that took over my entire body in that moment and felt physically and mentally sick. Power's still not working in the room, so I went to the living room once again and finished the night with all the lights on, not sleeping well at all. Nothing more ever came from that night, but as far as I can tell and find, the audio tape never existed. I've spent days upon days trying to find it multiple times all over the internet, and nothing even comes close up on the search results. By the way, the power to my room worked perfectly the following day after the sun rose, and has ever since. I swear, I don't know what happened. I've tried so many times to explain it rationally and to find the audio tape we'd listened to that night, and I haven't come close, neither has my friend, and we both remember it like it were yesterday.
This is actually a part 2 to a banishment I did for a family. About 8 months later, I get home from work just about after midnight one night, and there was a desperate message on my machine for me to call them back. I wasn't going to call anyone that late, so I go in and fix my bedtime half pot of coffee. I've always been weird. Drinking a half pot of coffee will put me to sleep faster than anything. So about the time my coffee gets done and I pour a cup, the phone rings. I pick it up and it's Jason, the man that left the desperate message earlier. He said the church down the road is sponsoring an exorcism on a young girl, and they are not having any luck. Is there any way I can come down? Now, it was over a 45-minute drive to his house, then on over to the church. It's already going on 1 a.m. I said yes, I would be there ASAP. About 25 minutes later, I pull up at his house. I won't say how fast I was going. He jumps in the van and gets me down to the church. I pull up to a back side door. Right as I park and cut off the engine, 4 men come running out the door. Don't forget, I'm still in my pizza uniform, covered in cornmeal and dough and other toppings along with pizza sauce. I sit there and say my prayers, wait for my answer from God. Then I get out, walk up to the 4 men. It seems they ran out when the girl in the chair that she was tied to started levitating. She was chanting something that just put the fear into them. 2 of the men were exorcists. The other 2 men were her family. So after listening to them cry, I said, "Gentlemen, do you want to see how it's done?" They said, "How what's done?" I said, "Banishing the demon, and there is one, I can feel it from here." They tried to stop me. They were professionals, and it was dangerous in there. I said, "Come on," and waved them in as I walked in. I walked up to a 13-year-old girl. I looked back and forth between her and the men, then said, "Cut her loose." The 4 tried to argue. My guys started loosening the straps. They were like, "Are you crazy?" I said, "I command you in the name of Jesus Christ, do not move." There was a horrible growl from the girl's body. After she was loose, I asked how and why the demon had chosen her. It took a minute, and finally, the girl's body said,
She was stupid enough to use a Ouija board and just invited me in.
I said, "Okay, it's time for you to go home." She started growling and trying to lunge at me, but could not get out of the seat. Me and my friend had to just kind of push the 4 back out of the way so I could do my thing. I walked up to her, put my left hand on her shoulder, took my right hand, lifted her chin, to a soft growl from her I looked into her eyes and said, "I'm just the messenger. I have no power over you. But I'm not the one commanding you. Jesus Christ commands you to leave this girl, return to hell and never return." She looked back into my eyes, tilted her head to the side. Then you saw peace come over her face, and the voice of a 13-year-old girl asked, "Who are you?" Those two exorcists were mad. They've been trying for 3 days with no luck. I come in and actually accomplish the goal in 30 seconds. In a total of 10 minutes, I found out all kinds of information. The two family members were really happy. I didn't mention everything that I discussed, and it wasn't quite as easy as I mentioned. I think I had to tell it twice, maybe 3 times to leave. But it should be that easy. If you believe and have faith, and you not only have God's permission, but He called you to do this, then nothing can stand against you. They had something missing. I don't know what they were missing. That was and is not my business. The only thing or person I need to worry about is me and my relationship with God. I think I'm closer to Him now than I was back then.
In 2002, when I was 19, I believe I had a close and personal encounter with a dark entity. My family lived in West Virginia, and up the hollow like most people in the state. Late one night, myself and 3 others decided to take a walk a bit further up the hollow, in a long, large loop. The idea was to walk along the roads which circle around the back of the family property. A short trip through the woods behind my great-uncle's house and then down the driveway to my house. In order to reach his property line, we had to leave the old dirt road and cross through a cow field. I was in the lead because I typically walk through these fields/woods when hunting and would walk this route in the dark with no problems. I felt that a bit of a backstory on my uncle is necessary. He was a Korean War infantryman. He was long divorced, bitter, and an alcoholic who didn't even socialize with his children or grandchildren. The man could literally drink a 30-pack of Milwaukee Best each and every day. There were times he would clear 2 30-packs. I know because I collected his cans every day for money. He was a bitter and hateful old man. It must be said that I regularly walked these woods, and before the night in question I had never experienced anything at all, or after, mainly because I never walked the route in the dark ever again. I would take the long walk home to avoid that patch of forest. It was a cloudy, moonless night, and as you guessed it, dark. No, we did not have flashlights. When I approached the fence, nothing. However, when I grabbed the barbed wire to cross, there was an entity, waiting on the other side. I did not see it. I saw darkness at first. It made itself known through a growl, guttural and low. It was head level to me, about 5'9". When it started to growl, it sounded between a bear and a deep rumble of a large dog. It was directly in front of me and I froze. My senses were going crazy trying to figure out what I was standing in front of. Its breath was hot and smelled of rotting flesh. Whatever it was in my face, daring me to cross. I must say, too, with my eyes only, because I dared not move. I tried to find it. I saw the tree directly behind it, but not it. I knew that I was going to die, and at that moment I was terrified to the core. As abrupt as it made itself known, it was gone. It left without making a sound. I felt all the hairs stand on end and my heart honestly must have missed a beat. I felt the chill of the air. I felt like I could breathe again. So I turned to look at those that were with me, and my worst fear was realized. This was real. It actually happened. 2 of them were frozen in spot with horror-stricken faces and the third was already running. Without another thought, I let go of the fence and ran past the 2. I ran to the closest dusk to dawnlight, climbed up an apple tree next to it, and waited there until daylight. I did go back the next day with a rifle on my body to find nothing. No hair, no footprints, nothing. You could see where I was standing. I never figured out what it was for sure. That was until last year, when I discovered the accounts of Ed and Lorraine Warren. They explained the many different haunts of demons, how they operate, and that it's when it all clicked. I came face to face with a demon. I figured I should let you know that my uncle did survive the oppression. His youngest son had removed him from the house and put him in rehab. My uncle never talked to his son again. He lived another 15 years, got clean, saved, remarried, and passed away from natural causes. To my knowledge, once he was out of the house, he never went back and never collected his possessions from the house. To be honest, it was a shanty at best. Years after the incident, only one of the family ever lived in the house, and they only lasted a few weeks. According to my cousin, they packed up everything and moved out, and called and said they wouldn't be returning. Before you ask, the house fell in on itself a few years ago. This is my true account of the situation, and I never truly found out what it was. All I know is Ed and Lorraine Warren spelled out how demons work. I'm a Christian, and as such, I believe in physical demons. All I know is that Ed and Lorraine Warren spelled out how demons work, and I'm fairly confident that is what I encountered.
I am a female and was 23 at the time of this story. These events took place in 2010, and I finally thought it was time to share the story of the horrifying events I went through with the demon in the basement. At the time, I had been in the lookout for a new place to live, as my roommate had a cat and I could no longer deal with my allergies. When I moved in with her, I was living in a dingy motel room, so having a roommate in a proper house was a serious upgrade. I thought the cat wouldn't be too much of an issue, but it was not meant to be. Being an animal lover, I could never even think about suggesting to someone to get rid of a beloved pet, so I opted to move out instead. I had been searching for a new place for a couple of weeks when I came across an ad on Craigslist describing a room for rent on a waterfront property. It was surprisingly affordable, and I was very intrigued. There were no photos on the ad, but the address was pretty close by. So I took a drive over to the place to take a look, and the property was beautiful. It definitely looked lived in and well maintained. So I called the number on the ad later that afternoon to make an inquiry. This is when I first came across Crazy Patty. At first, she seemed extremely friendly on the phone. We laughed and joked and got along very well. She said she would be delighted to meet me and come around at any time to view the property and the room for rent. So I made an appointment for the next day. I pulled up in the driveway and was greeted by Patty, waving warmly at me from the front porch. She was a middle-aged woman in her 40s. She had a kind of hippie-ish clothing style. She wore thick glasses and had long, frizzy brown hair. She was shorter than me by a couple of inches, and she spoke in a kind of nasally, baby voice. Now, before I continue, I would like to give a little background on the women of my family. We are all gifted in the spiritual realm. The gift can be traced back to my great-great-grandmother, who could read tea leaves. She was extremely gifted and did readings for her entire life until one day when she finished her tea and read her son's death. Needless to say, she never read tea leaves again. Since then, the women on my mother's side have inherited some kind of special gift. Whether it is clairvoyance, clairsentience, or something of that nature. Funnily enough, no one since my great-great-grandmother has had the ability to read tea leaves. I was lucky or unlucky enough to be a clairvoyant, meaning I can see, hear, and even smell things from the spirit world. These things happened very rarely to me, and at this point I just considered my abilities a bit of an annoying quirk and had not yet accepted them as part of who I am. Even though I was aware of my gifts and the spirit world, I was still a very skeptical person and always tried and even wanted to find rational explanations for things before I came to any conclusions about any kind of spiritual activity. Before these events, I had never experienced any kind of malevolent or demonic being. Since my phone conversation with Patty had gone so well, I was expecting us to get along just as well in real life. As I walked up the stairs of the porch to shake her hand, I immediately noticed her eyes. I can't fully explain how they looked, only that they were off. She said how nice it was to meet me and shook my hand. I immediately got icy chills down my spine. I managed to smile and said that it was great to meet her too. She took me inside and, to be fair, the house was beautiful. It had a massive living room with huge skylights, and there were lush plants everywhere. The kitchen was ultra-modern and sparkling clean. There was also a huge 2-story deck out back fully kitted out with furniture, a bar, and a fire pit. The deck opened out to a private beach on the lake. I immediately fell in love with the place. Patty took me downstairs to the finished basement, where the room for rent was. The basement consisted of 4 rooms, a large living room with a pool table, a bathroom, a smaller living room, and a bedroom. The rooms for rent were the bedroom and the smaller living room. Apart from being a little dark and without a huge amount of light, the rooms for rent were lovely. They were clean and fully furnished. Patty was extremely nice to me, and she seemed very excited to show me around, but something still seemed off about her. Despite the uneasiness I felt, I decided that I loved the house and that the next day, we went through all the relevant paperwork. I paid my deposit and before you know it, I was all moved in. At the time, I had no family where I was living. One side of my family were in Europe, where I had just moved from at the beginning of the summer, or all the way down in the southern part of the US. So I was feeling a little lonely, but I was optimistic. Patty worked during the day, and I worked at night at a bar, so we rarely saw each other. At first, this arrangement was perfect, and I was sitting in nicely. I had no issues until one night. About a week in, I decided to cook myself dinner. I had a night off, my first since moving in with Patty, and I was dying to use the gorgeous kitchen. Growing up, I was always taught to clean as I go, so I did just that. I heard Patty's keys in the front door and greeted her as she walked into the kitchen. My smile faltered as I saw the expression on her face. She looked enraged and she yelled at me, "What the hell are you doing?" Her brow was furrowed and her lips were pulled back in a snarl. I was completely shocked and my body froze for a moment before I answered shakily that I was just cooking dinner. I tried to appease her by offering her some, but she swelled like an angry toad and screamed that I had destroyed her kitchen. Now, my dinner was fairly simple, and I had been cleaning as I went along. The only thing that was dirty was one pan, which was already soaking in soapy water. I explained that I obviously had every intention of cleaning it up, but she screeched again, stomped down the hall and slammed her bedroom door. I quickly cleaned up everything and made sure the place was spotless before taking my plate down to my bedroom and eating down there, so I didn't run into her again. After that, things just got worse. Patty was no longer friendly with me and looked at me like I was just a gross insect that she longed to squash. I tried desperately to look for somewhere else to live, but I lived in a tourist area and it was a seasonal town. It was coming into winter and many businesses had shut down and residents moved out of state. I could find nowhere else to rent that I could afford. I even contacted my old roommate, but because of a sudden family issue, she moved back in with her parents. I kept looking for weeks, but found nothing. As the weeks went by, it became apparent that Patty didn't want me there. She wanted no trace of a roommate in her house. She wanted to collect the money and that was that. I tried to stay out of her way by doing my household chores and emerging from the basement when she was out of the house. On my nights off, I went into work to eat dinner, so I didn't have to use the kitchen. I made sure to only buy microwave dinners for the nights I couldn't afford to eat out. Every time I had to come upstairs and Patty was there, I would be met with her intense glare, with those eyes that continued to be off somehow. At this point in time, my living situation had started to affect me physically. I was constantly exhausted, my skin was paler, and I became very skittish. It was after this change in me started to take hold that things in the basement started happening. Things would go missing and then turn up. At first, I just put this down to forgetfulness, which I am prone to. But one day, something happened that made me incredibly uneasy. See, I always kept my work shoes in a specific spot when I came downstairs. I'd been called in for a day shift last minute and was getting my uniform on. On my way out, I went to grab my shoes, but they weren't there. Now, this was something I was not forgetful about. I always kept my shoes in a specific spot because Patty didn't want me dirtying up the carpet. I went upstairs to check and see if I had left them up there, and I hadn't. I looked everywhere for them and couldn't find them anywhere. Not putting it past Patty to do something mean like take my shoes, I went back downstairs to grab a different pair, only to stop dead in my tracks. Right there in their normal spot were my shoes. My heart leapt out of my chest. What was going on? I knew I was forgetful at times, but they definitely weren't there a minute ago. There had to be an explanation. Patty was at work, so I knew it wasn't her. And it was at that moment that a thought crept into my mind. Was there someone else in the house? Terrified, I grabbed my shoes and ran upstairs. I grabbed my keys and immediately left the house, locking the door behind me. I wondered if I should call the police, but what would I tell them? That I found my work shoes right where I'd left them? I thought about telling Patty, but the thought of telling her that something had bothered me like that would only give her ammunition to torment me further. So, I didn't tell anyone. After work, I came home to Patty eating her dinner and a mess in the kitchen. Luckily, I had the foresight to grab some food to go from the bar, so I crept in as quietly as possible and just went downstairs to eat, as I always did. I turned on the light in my room and for a split second thought I had seen a dark figure in the far corner of the room. I did a double take, my heart pounding. I had to be going nuts. The stress of this place was starting to make me hallucinate. Satisfied, but still a little uneasy with my explanation, I turned on my TV and began to eat my dinner. As I ate, I was still convinced I saw flutters of movement coming from the corner of the room, just out of my sight. But every time I looked, nothing. This mysterious figure would start making regular appearances out of the corner of my eye, but again, when I tried looking, there would be nothing there. I thought I was losing my mind, and I became even more withdrawn. It was after a few months of this happening that the dreams started. I would be having a perfectly normal dream, and then all of a sudden, I would have the feeling of being strangled by a faceless man. I would be fighting him off, and I would always wake myself up by screaming. I would wake up sweating and my heart would be pounding. The worst part was my throat would be sore, and I never knew if I had really been screaming or not. I would like to think that if I was, Patty would run down, but that was unlikely. I would start out having these dreams once or twice a month. Then, as it came closer into the fall of the following year, they started happening more regularly. Once a week, twice a week, every other day. I was feeling completely broken down mentally, emotionally, and physically. I was a shell of my former self. At this point, you were probably wondering why I stayed at Crazy Patty's house for as long as I did. Well, for those of you who have never experienced emotional and mental abuse, consider yourself lucky. It is extremely powerful. Patty used a variety of techniques, including manipulation, intimidation, and gaslighting, to ensure I stayed where I was. She hated me there, but she wanted the money. She literally had me convinced that I wouldn't find anywhere else as nice as her place for the price I was paying, and that no one would put up with me anyway. Up until this point, I had not considered my unsettling experiences at Patty's house to be demonic. I had put them down to a side effect of being so stressed and beaten down. Until one night, as usual, I had eaten my dinner out of a to-go box in my bedroom. I was sitting on my bed with my laptop on my lap. I had been watching some funny videos online when, all of a sudden, I couldn't take a breath. I felt like my chest was being constricted by an invisible vice grip. I went to move my hands up to my throat to check for a swelling or something, but I couldn't move my arms. I was completely paralyzed. It was then that I finally saw the figure in the corner. Its face was covered with a hood, but it lifted its head just enough for me to catch a glimpse of its face. Its eyes were huge and bulbous, much like the milky, pupilless eyes of an anglerfish. It had no other features except for those eyes and that smile, that toothy smile, full of uneven and rotten teeth. A smile that extended beyond the boundaries of its face. Think of Fred from that seriously creepy episode of Courage the Cowardly Dog. My heart stopped, and as soon as I saw this figure full on, it disappeared. I finally understood what was happening. I was being attacked. Somehow, I fought the pressure and it subsided. This ordeal couldn't have lasted for longer than 10 seconds or so, but it felt like much longer. I was finally able to draw a breath and lay on my bed, panting, as if I had just been drowning. I immediately jumped up and dug into my junk drawer. I found a few white candles, some sage, and a few crystals. I lit the white candles for protection. I lit the sage to purify the room, and I kept my crystals in my hand. Needless to say, I did not sleep much that night. After this incident, I continued to keep lighting sage at all times when I was in the room awake. And things settled down for a while. It wasn't until Halloween night that the crescendo of my experience peaked. Cliché, I know, but think about it. It was, and still is, believed that the veil to the spirit world is at its thinnest on All Hallows Eve, making it easier for spirits to enter our world. I'd been working that night and had gotten home around 1 a.m. Exhausted, I fell right to sleep, only to get that strangling sensation some hours later. But this time, it felt different. This time, it felt more real. In my dream, the entity that was attacking me had grabbed me by the throat. In the past, I had not seen its face while it was doing this. I finally got a full-on view of its face. I could see the cracks on its rotten teeth. I could see the pale blood vessels on its grotesque eyes. And I could smell its rotten breath. I felt a scream coming, but I couldn't get it out. In my dream, I fought and fought, desperately trying to escape its grasp. It picked me up by my throat and slammed me into the wall behind me. I kept fighting it with all my might until I finally woke up. I was sweating and panting, and tears were streaming down my face. I looked at the clock. It was only 3 a.m. But as soon as I looked at my clock, my blood froze in my veins. Not because it was 3 a.m., the traditional witching hour, but it was then that I realized that I was not laying in my bed. I was sitting up against the wall. I leapt out of bed and ran to the bathroom, afraid I was going to be sick. Luckily, my stomach held and I ended up splashing some cold water on my face. It was only when I caught a glimpse of myself in the mirror that I had to stifle a scream. My neck was bruised and scratched, like I had been strangled. Without even thinking about how late it was, I called my boss in absolute hysterics. The bar I worked at was attached to a hotel, and I pleaded with him to let me sleep in one of the rooms that night. He did, and I decided right then and there that I would be moving out of Crazy Patty's house. I arrived back the next day to pack up what few belongings I had. After I had everything all packed up, I noticed her bedroom door was open. This was highly unusual, as she always kept it locked when she wasn't there. Thinking maybe her car was in the shop and she was in there, I went over to tell her that I was leaving. But she wasn't in there. I went to close the door when something on the floor caught my eye. Normally, it is out of character for me to snoop in someone else's room, but something in my gut just told me to check out what it was that caught my eye. On the floor was a planchette that had been broken in half, with the glass shattered all over the floor. The glint of the glass is what caught my eye. And on the other side of the room was the board, the Ouija board. It finally clicked that it had been Patty that set this entity on me. I stormed out. I was fiddling with the house key, trying to get it off my keychain to leave on the counter with a note I had left her, when I noticed movement on the deck outside. I looked up and was absolutely horrified to see Patty standing on the other side of the glass door, staring right at me, completely naked. She had her hands on the glass and seemed to be pressing her face right against the glass. It was then that I noticed her eyes. Her eyes had always been off to me, but finally I understood why. Instead of her usual, slightly off eyes, staring right back at me were the milky, bulbous eyes of the entity. I quickly turned around, ran to my car and tore out of the driveway and never returned. Things got better after that. My anxiety subsided, my face filled out again, and I started to be a lot more social. After a few weeks, I moved into an apartment with 2 girls I worked with and got along very well with. I never saw Crazy Patty again. As of telling this story, almost 12 years have passed, and I am no longer easily beaten down by manipulation tactics. I've become a lot more assertive and will not tolerate any attempt to deceive or manipulate me. I've also been practicing white magic in the form of plants and cooking, and have embraced my clairvoyance as part of who I am. I'm happy to say that I've never experienced anything like I did at Crazy Patty's house. If I get even a whiff of negative energy, I get the hell out of Dodge. All in all, I'm a much healthier, stronger and happier person than I was all those years ago. But late at night, I still get the horrifying image of Patty staring into my soul, with the dead eyes of the demon in the basement.
Hello watchers and listeners, thank you so much for watching. As always, a big thank you to all of the Reddit users who kindly allowed me to use their stories. If you want to help support this channel, you will find links to both my Patreon and my Teespring store in the description below, so feel free to have a look. And the biggest thank you to all of you who continue to support me. I truly do appreciate it. And remember,
Papa loves you.